think I'm angry with her. I do feel cheated.
Is anxiety the thing that has us focused on finishing? And then is it
Mm.
that same anxiety that prevents us from finishing things?
You can't do it because the dance world won't accept you. When in reality, artists of all kinds are feeling the same way. I don't even know how to explain how much that just changed my world. Like, that was,
How many people are miserable and living miserable lives because they
yeah.
refuse to quit the wrong thing?
What an emotional, oh, what an emotional episode. Welcome back to Art Therapy.
I'm Ferga, a writer and filmmaker living in Spain.
And I'm Veronica, a dancer living in New York City.
Together, we're undergoing the 12-week Artist's Way journey by Julia Cameron.
Each week, for the next 12 weeks, we're checking in with each other as we unleash new parts of our creativity,
Reconnect to our inner artists,
and heal from blockages we never knew we had. Hi, how are you?
Middling, I'd say, but we're here and I'm excited.
Yeah. Okay, good. Are we on week 8?
Yes.
Week 8. Wow, I'm impressed with both of us. So welcome back to Art Therapy. Little side note, we only just figured out that name, so may or may not be in the other episodes, but we'll see. So this week we are working on recovering a sense of strength. This week tackles another major creative block, time.
Yeah, I feel like I'll defer to you to start us off just because this has been, I feel like, at the crux of so many of your issues that we've been discussing thus far. I've just been like, when I saw the topic, I was like, this is going to be a juicy week for Veronica.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's funny because our discussions last week have made me think a lot about anxiety, and time is always something that I've struggled with anxiety surrounding. This week was a really big realization that I feel like my internal thrum is very fast paced, and I'm a very impatient person, and I really am having trouble embracing the idea of slow living. And yet I really
Mhm.
want to. Like, I'm so attracted to all of these slow living, like, homesteading content girlies. Oh my gosh, this is so the opposite of who I feel like I am. And I've always kind of struggled with anxiety because of the nature of myself, that, like, that more fast-paced thinking. I think, like, this week especially made me realize that I need to embrace the idea of wasting my time, because the
Mm.
truth is, like, it's never really wasted. I think we got into this a little bit last time, but, like, the ability to let myself rest, it feels like if I do that, I'm going to spend all my time doing that. So
Mm.
I instead spend all my time being hyper productive, but I've reached a point where that's not working either. So now I'm trying to figure out, like, how can I balance being productive, because that feels good for me, but also just like reading a book sometimes
Mm.
that has nothing to do with personal development or like business development or anything of that nature. Just like, I just want to read a book about like a witch in a cottage in the middle of England somewhere, and
Mhm.
it gets me nowhere. It does nothing for us other than, like, it just chills me out, and it's beautiful and lovely, and I need to calm down.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that the first place you went was anxiety, because one of the lines from the readings this week that really jumped out at me was this bit where she was talking about the difference between the impulse to have finished things versus the impulse to start things. And
Uh-huh.
I thought that was so beautiful, and it really made me think a lot about how, if we think of this, our kind of genuine creative impulses as something a little bit beyond our ego, our insecurity, our desire for control and status, and we think of it as something a bit freer, like a freer part of ourselves, it made me realize, like, okay, the desire to have made something is an ego thing. It's like, it's me wanting to have the validation of being like, look, I achieved something. Amn't I neat? Or maybe amn't I acceptable? You know,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
sometimes we're not even going for neat. Sometimes it's just like, I'm not a complete fuck up. Look, I made something.
mm-hmm.
Um, And whereas the idea that the desire to start something or to be doing something, that's the creative impulse. And it was so interesting because just as I was thinking about this, I noticed that you uploaded a video that was titled or that it had in the title somewhere that you have this fear around not finishing things you start.
Uh-huh.
And that just was so fascinating to me because I was like, yeah, like obviously the skill of finishing the things we start is incredibly important in this life and something that we all have to cultivate on purpose. It's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. But at the same time, made me wonder, is anxiety the thing that has us focused on finishing? And then is it
Mm.
that same anxiety that prevents us from finishing things? Is it like a hyper focus on the end product that actually like strips the joy out of the process, and then B, kind of gives us so much fear that we can't enjoy the process? And I wonder if like that's an aspect of this for you. I was wondering if you could like talk about that because I know finishing things has been on your mind.
I love the way that you put it into words because it's just helping me wrap my mind around it. But totally, I guess I never really thought about it like that, but I do think that that is a big part of it. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because I have my own struggles surrounding this. And as I've been more vulnerable talking about it, I've had more conversations with some of my other friends, or just like in the comments of that video specifically, or other videos. A lot of people have been experiencing the same thing. And whether it's like a neurotypical brain type thing or
Mm,
not, I think that it's twofold. First of all, there is the sense of like, I just don't like having open loops in my brain. I feel this need to have, if I put something on a list, I want to take it off and be like, okay, that's done. And now I can like release myself from that. That's its own thing. But I think in a larger picture sense, and talking about creativity and our identity as creatives, I think that we feel a lot of our permission to call ourselves something based off of our accolades, based off of our accomplishments. So, like, if I say I'm a dancer, I feel like I have this fear surrounding that where it's like, well, what have you been in? What have you danced in? What have you done? And it's like, why is it not enough to just be in the middle of doing the action? Like, why is the ing not enough? I'm dancing. I'm dancing every week. I'm
mm,
dancing all the time. But that doesn't, for many people, make me a dancer. And we've talked about this with you. Like, it's hard to say, oh, I'm a filmmaker, because what does that mean? We have this like, this finishing component, this like accomplishment component tied to things that makes us feel like we earn the title or we are finally allowed. Another part of that too is, if we're still talking about this idea of like earning titles and earning the ability to call ourselves the artists that we want to call ourselves, if it's not a level of, okay, she has accomplishments, there's another time component of, well, how long have you been doing this for? How long, how many hours have you put in? Are you an expert? How much time do you spend a year? How much time have you spent in your life overall? Like, time is so linked with, I think, our identity as creatives. And I never thought about that before until it's been so heavy on my mind for the
mm.
past couple weeks.
That's so interesting. I when you were saying that as well, it really made me think as well about in the chapter they talk a lot about this idea of like starting too late, which I know has been a huge thing for you.
Mm-hmm.
But what it did make me think about is like I think that the kind of idea that there's certain points in your life where you are allowed to start things and certain points where you're not has been kind of like strangling me in weirdly the opposite way, which is that I think
Mm.
what I kind of realized when I started thinking about it was like, so a bit of the quick bit of context is that as I said in the last episode, I had like a pretty big health flare up relapse thing that I think was
Yeah.
kind of brought on by psychological stresses I was under a couple of weeks back. And I have been, I mean, it's been a really hard one. It's been a lot of pain. I really haven't been functioning. I haven't at the apartment in 3 weeks. I've been really sick.
Mm.
I literally put on mascara for this, but like I've just been in my pajamas. Like I really like I get out of breath going to the bathroom. Like it's
Oh,
intense.
yeah.
But it's interesting because I really pushed myself to that point, and I think what I've kind of realized is maybe I wouldn't be feeling this pressure or this anxiety if I didn't think that this was the only period in my life when I was allowed to do this stuff. So I think there is a part of my mind that is like, well, I'm in my mid-20s, and that is when you become an artist. That is when you go and you travel and you make this big life for yourself. And then when things happen in your life that get in the way of that, or if you're just in it and it's all going well, there's this kind of feeling of like, well, I only get these years. And then after that, I have to be really sensible. So I need to like do everything now. And there's this kind of frenzy to it. And when I was reading this, I was thinking, going back to our conversations about money and those ideas, and thinking about abundance mindsets with time versus like kind of lack mindsets with time. So just this idea of like, what would my life be like if I thought about time as this expansive thing that I have a lot of? Like, what if I thought I had, assuming that I lived to like the age of like 75, what if I thought I had 50, minimum? hopefully older, but whatever. That get like, what if I thought that means I have 50 years to become a writer, or 50 years to go on this journey, 50 years to do all these things? That's such a long amount of time. Whereas I think in my head, I have about 3.
Yeah.
And why do I
Yeah.
think that? It's ridiculous. But we have this
Right.
youth obsessed culture. And so it's so debilitating for people who are middle-aged or older, because or even just an older young person, because they feel like they're past it. But also when you're in it, it can create this tension. And it also reminded me of a friend who back in Dublin who said that they felt like the pandemic had taken the slice of their life, because it had taken, they hadn't achieved, like they hadn't been doing career stuff for 2 years. And they were like, that was my 2 years out of university. That was my 2 years where I was allowed to just hang out and be young and have fun and work shitty jobs and not worry about it. And now I miss that. And now I have to like catch up. I have to whatever. And I remember just sort of thinking like, why? Like, I hear you and I know exactly what you mean. And also like, why is that true? Like, if we're living till our 80s, like, why is it also rushed at the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I mentioned to you that like the idea of mortality and all of that, it has acted in my life as something that's been a major motivator, but also a major hindrance. And I really love that you're reminding me that our entire culture is youth obsessed, because it's particularly bad in the dance world, at least in my opinion. But I think that's also kind of an excuse that my brain used to be like, see, you can't do it because the dance world won't accept you. When in reality, artists of all kinds are feeling the same way. Oh, I'm too old, I'm too late. And it kind of shocks me sometimes, because I'm like, who said anything about like you can't start watercolor at 27, or like, I know why in my mind there was such a clear idea of, oh, you're too late and we don't want you, because someone told me that. But like, has anyone ever said to these other artists, like point blank, that strictly, that no, you're not welcome anymore? And I don't, maybe yes, maybe no, but I think that it's like, you're so right. We're getting these messages from society all the time without even realizing it. We don't even realize like how much they impact us. And I love a challenge, like even like what you said, like, yes, I agree and I see where you're coming from, but also why why do we feel that way? Like, because if we really critically look at these boundaries that we put in front of ourselves, time being a major one, when you look at it critically, some aspects of it make sense, but I think we give too much credence to the elements that make sense and not enough to the parts that just don't make sense. Like, for example, yes, the truth is we will all, our lives are all going to come to an end. That's reality. But we can use that to be like, well, I better get stuff done now, and like, allow that to motivate us. But in a way, my brain has kind of used that idea to trick me, where it's like, I feel like I'm running out of time. I'm running out of time because, like, I don't know, tomorrow I could be gone. This is all I have. And yet, my brain, instead of making that like a motivator for me, my brain has
Mm.
used that to just entirely overwhelm me and say, like, basically, there's just no point, which is such a weird,
Okay.
twisted thing that I don't even fully understand because I'm not a nihilist. I'm an
Mm.
optimist, like 100%. But not that optimism and nihilism are like
Yeah.
opposites, but I'm a positive person. I don't really believe that there's no point. And in fact, I believe the 100% opposite, where it's like there's a point to everything, there's a purpose. Like, I want to find my purpose. I believe everybody should have their own purpose. And yet, this like dark shadow part of my brain is like, there's just no point because you've already wasted so much of your precious life. So who are you to not waste more of it, if that makes sense?
Wow. Oh my gosh. Say more about that. That's fascinating that your mind goes there. Especially
Yeah.
because I feel like unless something terrible happens, you are less than half of the way through. And a
I
lot
know.
of the first decades of our life we have no control over. So it seems to me like it totally makes sense for you to be beginning things in this moment and kind of defining what the sort of definitive choices and like practices of your life are going to be. So I'm really fascinated that you feel that way. But I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, I'm also fascinated that I feel that way because I'm just like, what? Where did this come from? And where did I get that? I think like I think maybe it got me thinking like towards the end of high school because it was this weird paradox where at the end of high school I had finally allowed myself to like unblock my creativity and join my school's musical, and that helped me get over my fear of singing in front of people, and it just like unblocked everything. In that way, time I had been able to harness the power of time in a very positive way because I had told myself for 4 years, all 4 years of high school, that I wanted to do this. Every year that went by, it felt like I was losing another year,
Mm.
and so I told myself, like, by the time I leave high school, I want to get over my fear of singing in front of people. Like, I just want to try it. And so of course I wait until my last year.
Hmm.
But I finally did it. And again, like that time pressure helped me because I just imagined, like, what will I do if I get to how is it going to feel if I get to the end of high school and now I'm in college and I still feel so stuck and blocked? Like, I don't want to feel that way. So I used that to force myself into action. But then at a time when it felt like my life was just starting to begin, I lost someone really close to me, my aunt, who was like a really big inspiration to me and just like so important. And so then it kind of got me thinking, like, oh my gosh, life is so short and I want to do all of these things, but then I didn't understand why I was like almost sabotaging myself in a lot of ways out of fear, like these other components of like fear of failure and all these other things. So then it's like I think it just kind of warped my perception of time. It's almost like my brain convinced me that I was already it already ran out, rather than saying like, well, how do I want to envision my life at the end of my life? Let's imagine that's 80 or 90 years old. Like, how do I want to feel? Who's the person that I want to be? And using that to like bring that into the present and say, okay, how can I become her now? My
Mm.
brain was like, you could be gone tomorrow and your life right now looks nothing like the person that you want to be, and that feels so far away and so overwhelming that it's like you're just never going to get there. So it basically made me give it up instead of looking at that and being like, great, now how do I bring that into the present today? It was like, there's no point. Like, you're not going to do that. You're never going to get there. You've already wasted so much time. You're going to continue to waste time for the rest of your life.
That is so interesting because it sounds like you did with your life what you sometimes do with projects. Hello, our therapist coming to absolutely hot
Lay
take
it
all over
on
your
me.
all over your psyche. But like it sounds like you also in that moment removed yourself from the act of creating, i.e. creating a life or like being embodied in the present, and got completely obsessed with that idea of having created, of having lived the life. And then got so
Exactly.
overwhelmed by how far away that is that like again, that desire to finish the thing prevented you from finishing the thing because you can't be thinking about finishing while you're doing. And that's like such an
Yeah.
interesting parallel to be realizing, like that not only do we do with our projects but with ourselves. I also think there's something so interesting about like you having this like time bracket in school, because something I've been really thinking about a lot this week, and I've actually been like creating some new practices around, which has been really lovely. um
Mm.
is this idea of kind of controlling time. I think like a great way, if you are an existential kind of person, if you're thinking a lot about like, what am I doing with my life and am I fulfilled, which is like all my thoughts. Yeah, exactly. uh, it's like we control our time very intensely. And I think living in the world, having a body, specifically a disabled body, but having any body, like living
Yeah.
with another person, like all of these things, there's all these ways we cannot control our time. And so it becomes this unbelievably stressful thing where you get up in the morning and you're completely neurotic and you're like, I'm going to use every freaking minute of this day and I'm going to work it all out and make sure I do all these millions of things that I set up for myself to do. And then someone comes in and you weren't expecting them, and then like you have to call a plumber, and you just are so frustrated because you're in this playing this constant losing game with time. um and you're nodding. You're like, yeah, that's my life. And it's just this incredible stressiness to it. And
Yeah.
these past few weeks, I've had no control over my time. And I really was like, I can't do anything. If I even try to do anything, like
Yeah.
all the projects I'm working on, if I have to just literally take a break. Side note, it's funny because I was in I'm doing a writing course at the moment that's to do with novel writing. So I'm doing a draft of a novel, and um these are usually like self-directed projects for me, but in this case I have like a mentor who's supposed to be
Mm.
going along the process with me. And it was, I cannot tell you how lovely it was for me to like literally call in sick. Like I sent her an email and I was like, I'm really sick, so I'm not going to be working on my novel for like the next week, like see ya. And I was just like, this is so great, because like why is it that like I still have that thing as a child of like needing permission to not do my homework? Like just telling her, I
Oh
was like,
yeah.
now I'm not going to feel weird about it. But anyway, now it's official, like so I'm allowed. But what I kind of realized is, well, one thing that came up a lot was like just the day was so much smoother because I wasn't literally trying to control every last second. And I
Yeah.
realized that the day was longer and deeper, and that a lot of the problems I've been trying to sort out in various projects and also in just life that I've been really blocked about, kind of the answers just started coming to me because I was more rested, because I was giving myself time for things to come to me instead of constantly using all my time in this really controlled way in which I was the only agent, and like there was no space for like mysterious things to happen or for my brain to wander into places that I didn't expect. And
Yeah.
something that I've been doing is I think I said this to you before, but I've been thinking a lot about the difference between kind of writing rules for myself versus trying to get in touch with my intuition. So normally what
Mm.
I would do if I was afraid, if I was in a situation like this where I need to be very careful, because when my body is in these kind of positions, when I'm going through phases like this, it can be really easy to make myself a lot sicker and to really injure myself. So I have to really be in major intuition mode, major higher self
Yeah.
mode when my body is this sick. Otherwise, I can like get myself bedridden for literally years. Like it's gone horribly before. So I normally what I would do is, fearing that I would not know how to use my time, fearing that I would make mistakes or get into my head and decide to do something nuts, decide to study or sit an exam or something.
Yeah.
I would make all these rules for myself. You're not going to have caffeine. You're not going to have sugar. You're not going to have all these things. You're going to sleep between this hour and this hour. You're going to like, I would just make these enormous regimes. And then of course, when you make all
Sounds
these,
really fun.
and of course, when you make all these rules for yourself, you do break them and the whole thing becomes a travesty. So
Uh-huh.
I've been starting off the day instead, writing a letter to what I call the voice of wisdom or the voice of reason,
Ooh.
and then writing back to myself. And we
Ah.
talk every morning, and it's gorgeous. And it's a really, really nice practice. And the way I write my letter, and I write all my little worries and all my questions about how I'm supposed to approach the day and what I should focus on and what I should do. And then I read some poems that have the energy that I think my voice of reason has. And the voice of my reason is directly plagiarized from the poet Mary Oliver. And she had this poem, the poem from which the quote "wild and precious life" comes from. You know, you see that, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? You see that all around. And I feel like you almost half quoted it earlier on in this episode. You said
Mm,
something about your one life or something.
yeah.
And there's a line in that poem which is, I know how to be idle and blessed. And I
Mm,
was reading it, the poem over again, and there's so many beautiful lines in it. But these past weeks, that's the line that has been really leaping out at me, because really that's what she's saying in that poem. What she's doing with her one wild and precious life is being idle and blessed, is knowing how to sit in a moment and just live it. And I was kind of realizing, like, the great irony perhaps is that my illness has given me a life where I am idle a lot, and yet I'm literally physically not able to move, but I'm not idle. My mind is still trying to whir so fast. I'm still trying to distract myself before this year when I cut myself off from technology. But like, and so it was so interesting. So anyway, so I've been trying to kind of approach time from a slightly more idle and blessed standpoint. And instead of trying to control each thing and give myself 5-year plans, I'm trying to kind of explore this slightly more, this idea that maybe at the end of life, we won't, one of the regrets could end up being just not having trained ourselves or learned how to sit in it.
yeah.
And so that's been a kind of a philosophical shift, and a kind of a shift that I've been working on a lot this week. And it's been really beautiful.
Yeah. So how do you feel now after having implemented all of that? Like what, like, so you're saying that you were very rigid with your time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And do you feel like that helped you at all? Or do you feel like
definitely.
you're just okay?
No, like I think it's amazing. Like this has been like a really interesting and beautiful week, and I feel like this whole year for me really doing my little cleanse of distraction and sitting with myself. I know, it's ridiculous. Doing my like whole year of like, not looking at online and trying to sit
Yeah.
with myself really is to have this like deeper sense of peace, and to just not be so completely frazzled all the time, and just kind of be more at peace with all of life, really. And I really think this week was a week of many breakthroughs, and the last partly because of this process each morning of talking to this version of myself, or this voice within me that seems wiser and seems a little bit beyond all of my ego worries about, but I have to get this done, and what about this,
Mm,
and that seems less afraid of sitting in silence. And I think like sitting in I think it's so interesting because you've been talking so much about death and these existential questions of like, what am I doing with my life?
mm,
And they feel so related to me, because it's like, I feel like when you are someone who wants an answer, who wants to feel like, it's okay, I got this, I'm alive, I'm gonna die, we're all gonna die, it's terrifying, I want to know that I'm doing the right thing about it, I want to know that I want some peace with that, and I want to feel secure. And so I'm
yeah.
going to think about what kind of life I want to lead, and think about how I'm going to live it, and then I'm going to do it right. and like
Yeah.
and like, I'm not 100% sure that's how it works, although there obviously is so many elements of that you have to do. You have to work out what your dreams are, and you do want that purpose, but it
Yeah.
can't just all be lists. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Oh my gosh, it's so funny because I I literally Googled the other day, why do I like making lists so much? And then it gave me a list and then I made a list about it. Like I oh my God, I need to just not do anything of this nature for like at least a week. Let's just test that out, see how that feels
Yeah,
for a
you
little
need to be
while.
idle and blessed.
Yeah, I love that. Oh my gosh. I think, in the artist's way, she often has you like write some quotes down and then paste it up somewhere. And I think that's one that I need to write out and
Mm.
paste where I can see it all the time because I need that. As you were talking, it was making me realize that I think one of the major issues that I have surrounding time is because I feel like I already wasted so
Mm.
much of my time. Like I'm in my late 20s now, and I didn't explore, or I avoided the life that I wanted to live for such a long time.
Mm.
And it's very difficult for me now to be okay with that. Like, I think I'm still healing from the realization that I maybe could have been at a different point right now in my journey. And actually it's making me even think, like, this idea of finishing things.
Mm.
I think I have such a problem with it because, like, I started getting involved in theater and performance and singing and dancing and stuff, and then I stopped. And
Mm.
then I started it again, and then I stopped, and then I started it, and COVID hit, and like I had to stop. And so it's just this idea of being very uncomfortable with starting and stopping things, because to me that means you've wasted so much time on this thing that you say is so important to you. And I know that it's a big part of my purpose. Like, there's just performing, singing, dancing, all of that. I've said this before many times, I'll say it again. That feels like the highest form of meditation for me, because I am just not thinking about anything else. I am 100% present in that moment. And that to me is like, I just feel so aligned. But why did I avoid it for such a long time? Why didn't I do it? So now it's like, I'm here, and I think I might almost be punishing myself, because, and like making myself overwork and not being comfortable with ever resting, because it's like we have so much time to make up, like with so much lost time to make up. So now you don't have time to read your books about magical witches and forests. You like,
Yes. Yeah.
there's nothing that's more important than just like working 100% of the time. But that's not conducive, that's not productive. Like, I need to rest, you need to rest, and we have to be
Mm.
okay with that.
When you were talking, it just made me think a lot about how, like, I've been really thinking about the fact that, like, I was so, intense about not wasting, time in February and early March, that like I fit so much into the days and then completely got so sick. And now I haven't done anything productive for the last 3 weeks, which is fine because I actually feel like so much has changed within me in the last 3 weeks that it's like more exciting to me than, if I've been like whatever producing stuff. So I'm really in a good place with that. But it's also so
Yeah.
funny to me because I realize, like, by the time I'm over this health collapse, I'm sure I could have like not had it and just done half the things I did in February and the other half in March. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like we
exactly.
every time we rush, we end up falling and really losing a lot of time that way. Not that it's ever
Yeah.
lost. So you feel like you're punishing your past self for avoiding her dreams. I think we're going to need to go into that a little deeper.
Oh no.
I'm so fascinated by this because I wonder, like, I know you've done a lot of mindset work on this, and I know you have a very deep awareness of like what it was that was holding that person back. And it's so much of what we've discussed so far. But like, do you feel like you have a lot of compassion with that person who wasn't dancing, or do you feel in some ways angry at her? Like, do you feel like kind of cheated by her? Like, do you feel a kind of a sense of like, okay, this person had all these terrible mindsets and was holding herself back, and that's really sad? Or do you feel like that person took something from me? Or is it like kind of both?
I think I'm angry with her. I do feel cheated. And yes, there's this higher part of me that understands why, but I'm just realizing through all of this, like this conversation and this week, that I'm not over it yet. It's like I
Mm.
don't know, like someone can wrong you, and you can get to a point where, okay, fine, I see why they wronged me. I see that they were dealing with their own stuff, and maybe they didn't even have the mental capacity to not wrong me at the time, but it doesn't make it any less hurtful. And I think, like, even just a couple weeks ago when we were talking about that early 20s version of myself, and that letter that I found to
Mm.
myself, um I so many puzzle pieces are coming together for me right now, where it's like, that's I think a big part of the reason why I said I don't like that girl, like she just wasted so much of her time. She wasted my time, you
Mm,
know, and I think that's also why I get frustrated with other people when they say that they want to do these things and they're not taking any action on it either. Like that, I was
yes.
talking a little bit about that.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
it's
like
all coming together. No
I
wonder you
know.
get so like angry about it.
That's exactly what I was saying last week, where I'm like, I don't know why I'm so bothered by this. Like, why does this like genuinely piss me off? And I can't let bygones be bygones. I'm like, no, no, no. You said you want to learn how to tap dance. Like, what are we doing? Are you tap dancing? And again, like, I think when used in when harnessed in the right way, that is a gift and it can be a strength. And I get a lot of feedback from people that's like, oh, I'm very motivating and all of those things, which is great. But then that makes me feel bad because it's like, well, you don't know all the things that I don't do or the things that I haven't done or the time that I feel I have wasted. So, yeah, I think I'm getting there, but this has released for me a major epiphany that I'm still really angry with myself and I'm not over it yet. Like you have some
Yeah.
explaining to do.
I think it's really that's really fair, and I think it's very fair. I mean, it's really interesting, but I made a new friend here recently, and we were literally talking about how uh like when it's kind of a phenomenon like psychologically that when we enter a period of life that's a bit better, when we have removed ourselves from a traumatic situation or just improved our life in any way, like freed ourselves from something, you kind of expect to feel this euphoria or something. You expect to feel
Yeah.
that feeling of freedom, but really what you feel is this enormous grief, because when we're living in one way for a long time, it becomes very normal to us. um and we don't necessarily have something to compare it to, and then when we see ourselves in a different context, whether it's a different behavior that's kinder to ourselves, or whether it's like being more authentic, or whether it's just like being healthier or being away from someone who's harmful to us or whatever, like we have this suddenly this context of like, oh, this is what it could have been like. And then there's just this enormous amount of emotion that we didn't like. Suddenly it's like, oh, I suddenly have like all this pain from the last few years, but during them I did I like what? That seems unfair. And
Yeah.
I think it's really okay. And I would really encourage you, I think, to kind of sit in those uncomfortable feelings and maybe like dive into them, because I think you probably don't want to be acting from them forever. Like they're probably not a good place. And I imagine like a lot of this, like even as you're speaking, so much of what you were saying about like your kind of existential fears and like, am
Yeah.
I doing the right stuff with my life, and the fear of death being crippling and everything. And it's like, well, yeah, because your dying self or your elderly self, maybe is judgmental to you now as you are to yourself, during your early 20s. So you have an
Yeah.
experience of having felt like you failed at something. So that could in itself be making the present scarier, because you're like,
Yeah.
you have this, you're afraid you're going to maybe feel at the end of your life the same rage that you feel now, but maybe fearing it can feel often to a lot of us that like fear is a good motivator. We all
Yeah.
think this and we're all wrong. We need to get over that one. We all think, oh, I'm so angry at myself, or I'm going to be angry at myself if I don't do this, and so I should do it. And it never allows us to, blossom in the way that we can if it's all about this idea of a vengeful future self. And I
Yeah.
wonder if that feels true to you, like if when you put pressure on yourself, if it's coming from this place of being like, what if my 40-year-old self is as angry at my 30-year-old self as my 30-year-old self is at my 20-year-old self?
Oh my gosh, so much is coming up right now. I've always felt like I had a really good relationship with my my
Mm,
elderly self. But what I'm realizing now is that every time I write to my elderly self, I'm always saying, I'm making you proud. I'm trying to make you proud. And I don't know that there's anything necessarily like 100% wrong with that, but I do think that it's, in my case, it's making me realize that again, my I have this picture of my like highest self and my best self only loving and accepting me if I accomplish the things that I say I want to accomplish right now. Where I know, like, I still want her to be proud of me, and I do think that like goals and accomplishments, they are important things for me, because
Mm.
moving to New York was a major goal of mine. It changed my life. Learning to dance was a major goal of mine. It's changing my life. Like,
Mhm.
those things are important to me, but maybe I don't have to think of my highest self and my elderly self as this woman who's either going to like be massively disappointed in me, or be like, you did it. I accepted you. It's like she is probably has such a larger worldview and is going to be able to look at like, hey, look at this element. You like, look at what you didn't realize. Like, look at how beautiful your journey overall is. I'm learning to be more compassionate with myself, even in the dance space. I mean, okay, art is so linked with life. It's crazy. Like, your creative
Mhm.
practice and your life are just like so parallel. But yeah, I mean, I'm learning to be more compassionate with myself in the dance space. Like, I've been able to step into this idea of, why are you expecting yourself to be perfect right now when you've never done this before, and you cannot be comparing yourself to someone in their chapter 26, and you're in like maybe chapter 2, not even, like, you might even still be in the prologue, we don't even know. But then in the grand scheme of life, I'm still struggling with that idea of like, why did you use your time like that? And then it was really interesting too, like in the exercises, she had us do this thing of, where, like, who might you have been if you'd had perfect parenting, or all of these things. And like, that was really hitting me, because I'm just like, yeah, like, I, not that I blame my parents necessarily, but like, it was just again this idea of like, how would my life have been if I just didn't, like, if I had more guidance into the right things, and if I had been able to express myself the way that I wanted to express myself for so long and couldn't, and now I finally can. But what's the point of it? Like, I'll probably never be a professional dancer, and I'll probably never do this, and what if I never get on point? And like, there's just so much that's like, whoa.
Yeah, yeah. And also I think it's so interesting because first of all, I think I don't know if you've like ever done shadow work or thought about the shadow self, but
Mm.
I feel like your early 20s might be where she's located. And I think it's so interesting when I hear like this idea you have of like you're rage at her, and then also this idea you have that like this thing that keeps coming up, this idea of like, well, if I rest I'll just never stop, which is so baffling to me because that doesn't seem true for you at all. Like, I just don't think that would happen. Like, I think you'd like lie down for a little bit, you take a nap, you kind of recover, you'd see like a TikTok, and then you'd be like, oh my God, I gotta go build a house, I gotta go bake a cake, I'm learning to dance. I'm like, I just feel like the world is an intrinsically like stimulating place for you, and you'd like to participate in it. So like, I don't think that's a fear, but it makes sense that if like one of your fears about yourself, one of your like places of self-distrust comes from the sense of like, I just can't be trusted with my time.
Yeah.
Like, I can see why that is just such a vice grip on you.
You know, I feel so seen and understood. You saying that right now
Mhm.
just like gave me so much permission, because I'm like, she's right. Like, what? Like, it's okay. I'm not gonna be that person who's just like a lazy person, or like, I don't
Mhm.
have it in me.
Not that that's a bad thing. If the kids at home,
No,
if you guys
no.
know how to be idle and blessed, can you tell us? Like,
Like,
God, we respect you. You guys are the ones. You guys are the real ones.
exactly. I think like I heard someone, I think her name is Jenna Phillips or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. She's here
Mm-hmm.
on YouTube. And she was saying like we all have our tax to pay. Like she considers herself an impatient person. So she's like, there's elements of that are good, but then there's like a tax I have to pay for that, like the stress that I put on myself. And so I think it's like a person who maybe considers themselves lazy or like has just a little bit slower of a pace, slower of an internal thrum. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like that suits them in certain ways, and then they're gonna have their own tax to pay. So like, not that anything is wrong or right or whatever, but it's just a matter of like, I'm realizing that my tax is getting a little bit out of control and I need to like Boston Tea Party this shit and be like, we will not pay. like like a little bit of tax is okay, I get it, but like you're sucking me dry here. This doesn't make any sense. I was also curious for you
Mm-hmm.
because it sounds like this is something that you have struggled with, but I know that like you talk about the fact that you have spent months, weeks, sometimes years being
Mm-hmm.
in bed, not being able to do the things that you wanted to do. So like, how has this affected you? Because you seem very healthy with it, and I'm like, what can I learn from this?
Well, okay, that's a big and complicated question. But I think there's an element with me of like the beautiful thing about disability in some ways is that it means that a lot of humans I feel are able to labor under this delusion that we are machines. And if you have a disability, if you have an illness that you're going to have forever, that fundamental, and the reason I call it a disability is actually quite relevant because I think so much of my struggle with it is, I mean, it is literally a disability, but the reason I'm gravitating towards that word rather than illness is because I've realized that so much of how it comes up in my life is that like my condition prevents me from participating in the world, in the workforce, in the society as it's currently built in a traditional way.
Yeah.
So all of my the shame when and then this has been something I've been really thinking about a lot this year, and actually was a huge part of why I decided to do this year of not numbing myself and really sitting with myself, because I realized that like I was acting from this place that you've described of I not just that I've wasted too much time, more that my illness has created a scenario in which I feel that there's been chunks of time that I was not productive, or also the actual structure of my life is very baffling to some people. And if someone is someone who really judges people by their productivity or their career progress or their money or whatever, just the facts of my life, finding out that I have the condition that I have, that my life is the way that it is, that I had this very like chaotic kind of like freelance here and then go to bed for a week and then like I'll have no value in their eyes. And that's, I mean, it's really what a lot of this comes down to, because I think as well we talk about our own mindsets and sometimes we can be so cruel to ourselves, even in the way that you feel so frustrated with your 20-year-old self. And sometimes I feel frustrated with all of the time I've spent not really understanding or not getting to learn my body and my life and really look at it. But we have to remember that like we live in a society and a lot of our fears aren't just us being crazy. Like we have this way of talking about ourselves where we say like, well, I have this problem and this problem, I'm nuts. But actually it comes from the world around us. And these are I mean, it's not, I'm not, I know I live in an ableist world. I'm not nuts to think that people will get cross at me for not living a life that they understand. But what I've realized is just like that's not productive for me at all. Like that's just not a
Yeah.
productive thought for me to be dealing with. And it's made me have to interrogate in a very straightforward and serious way the fact that like, you may feel lazy sometimes, but for the rest of my life, probably people are going to be accusing me of being lazy. People are going to be having debates about, whether disabled people should live, basically, whether they should their healthcare should be subsidized. Like, it's this enormous question. And I've been really thinking and writing towards and trying to think towards and really heal towards this idea of like, I can spend my life proving to them that even though I work in this different way and live in this different way, I am still productive and clever and worthy because of all of the things I still have to say and all of that I have to share, even if it's just not the way they imagine it. Like I feel so empowered by the idea that like you think I can't write a book because I can't sit at a desk for 3 hours every day, and maybe that's how you write a book, but I can write it. I'm so resourceful, and isn't that beautiful? And all these different things, and maybe I can hodgepodge together like a creative career that's really enormous and fulfilling, just out of sheer like resourcefulness and creativity and creative thinking about how I go about things. And that's really exciting. But I also have to keep reminding myself lately, that's all very well, Ferg, but if you're doing it to try and exempt yourself from ableism, like if all of this is coming from a place of me being like, I can't stand that people sometimes say, like people have told my girlfriend that she should break up with me, or kind of implied it, because they don't think that I'm they've raised,
like you're
yeah,
dragging her down.
yeah, and like just people who don't people there's so many people in the world who just will write off someone with a disability or an illness because they just
Mm,
don't see your value. And I had to kind of be like, I can't put my whole life towards proving these people wrong. Like, and it's so funny because actually in pop culture and stuff, a lot of the time we talk about proving people wrong as this really empowering thing. It's like, oh, you did something shitty to me, and then, and even and like, I'm not saying that isn't a beautiful source of like,
yeah.
God bless, like live your dreams powered on spite. Like I love it. But there's something intrinsically, again, it's kind of this like, it's all coming from this anxious place. Then it becomes this whole
Yeah.
thing of like, it's so hard. And then if I can't show up to it in that way, or if I find myself overworking because it's not about me anymore. It's become about this person who I'm trying to prove myself to. It's becoming about me trying to exempt myself from ableism, by successfully proving that I'm like fiscally worthy, within a capitalist
Yeah.
system. Like it's just not
Yeah.
very it's just not a very beautiful way to spend your life. um
Yeah.
and so like I've been really trying to like, really, I think the artist way course has a lot been for me trying to just like realize how much my insecurities about is this going to succeed or fail is because I'm asking everything I do to exempt me from ableism, and nothing's ever going to, and I have to accept it. But I
Mm,
think doing that work has changed my relationship with these things, because I've realized that I can't afford to think about work in that way. And so I've had
yeah.
to kind of do that work maybe in a more, maybe I'm doing it faster, or I'm doing it on a hard mode in a way that a lot of people in our generation are doing it a little slower. because I'm just like, I just can't, like, it's too destructive for me, and it's too easy for me to get seduced by this idea that I'll work hard enough and then no one will be able to call me disabled anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like I can outwork my disability. I can outwork this actual form of oppression, that exists in our society. And I
Yeah.
can't. But anyway, so I think that's really interesting, because I think that again comes down to like, it's so beautiful and radical to start rethinking a life that's beyond that fear. And I think living with a disability has to be beyond that fear of like, can I control all of the ways I'm productive and all the things that I achieve every week, every month, every year? There has to be this way, there has to be almost this faith of like, I'm going to have to approach life in this different way, where I'm not going to let anyone tell me no, and I'm going to be so resourceful, and I'm going to find all the ways to do all the things that I want to do. But I can't expect myself to always know how I reach the goal, or I can't be like anal about it. There has to be like an improvisational element.
Yeah.
And I think learning that lately has been quite beautiful. And I think it's interesting because I feel like that's so related to you. And I think, you may not have a disability, but I think we all have this thing of like, there's always that part of us that's like, we have to prove ourselves. And
Yeah.
I wonder how productive that is as a motivation.
Yeah. I mean, when you were talking about how people live their life out of spite,
Mm-hmm.
what came up for me is I think it's very seductive to do that. I
Mm.
think it's our knee jerk reaction, but it's like you said, like you get to this point where it's so flimsy and it's so hollow. You're working so hard to prove yourself to people that like you could finally prove yourself to them, and then they're just like, "Oh, okay." Like they don't even
Exactly.
care.
Yeah, they don't care. Yeah. And
It's
also
like
there'll always be something else. There's
exactly.
this really fantastic Toni Morrison quote that's to do with I know the first line is the very serious function of racism is distraction. And it's
Mm,
this amazing quote, and it's all to do with how she's kind of pointing out to Black people and people of color that like, you can fall into this place where you're constantly having to prove yourself. People are throwing out these horrible things about you or your culture or your history, and you get distracted from all the things you want to do in your life, all the things you've been put on earth to do, because you have to be like, you're doing this constant work of just dealing with the racism. And
Yeah.
it's this beautiful quote, because she really talks about like that sense of distraction and how much of a drain it is. And she really empowers. The last line is beautiful. She says, you can come talk straight to me, meaning that you don't have to be always talking to this ignorant racist voyeur. You don't have to be always performing for this person. You can just talk straight to me. I know I'm not going to ask you. I'm not going to think that about you. And then you can just cut straight to the chase. You can cut straight to like what your soul is trying to say. And it's one of the most, I have it pinned on my wall because I'm just like, this is so wonderful, both to gain a greater empathy with people who are experiencing that, but also just, there's no such thing as one way liberation. Like when someone identifies something about their own liberation, also often it triggers a thought about your own. And it
Yes.
made me think about just how true that is of disability as well, just because you spend so much time as a disabled person being like, I know you think I'm lazy, but here's all this, so I'm going to work myself to the ground in all these ways I don't even care about, just so I can prove to you I'm not lazy. And I know you think I'm useless and I'm a drain on society, so I'm going to do all these things. And then somewhere in that you lose the actual things you're put on earth to do, And so I
Yeah.
think a lot about like, what are the ways that we or society are asking us to constantly prove ourselves in this really negative, insidious way? And like, is the purpose of that, to distract us from the light we're meant to give and all of what we are meant to do? And how can we just always remind ourselves, like, who would I be if I think the person who's judging me isn't, this person who asks me to prove myself, but if the person I'm speaking to, the person who's judging me, the person who's whatever, is that person who gets it? And I wonder, like, are you talking to a very punitive and angry younger, like older self? And what would it mean to like remove yourself from all of this distracting, like, look, no, it's okay, I'm not fucking up this time, I did this, this, and this, and this week.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
if there is someone else that you could live your life in conversation with, like, what would it mean to be speaking and like living towards, I don't know, something else, something that isn't so, I don't know, vengeful, or something that's not going to be
Yeah.
cross at you.
I don't think that my idea of my higher self is someone who's like cracking the whip or anything, but
No.
I think it's kind of like, it's almost like I see the older version of myself where it's like she is not really too fussed about it, but this current version of me feels like I just, if I don't do this, she's going to reject me, even though she's never said that. Like that may or may not be true, but I don't think I've even asked her. I don't even think I've like had that conversation with her. Like, is this what my love is contingent on? Like, I'm pretty sure my mom loves me, whether or not, like she sees me struggle with follow through. She still loves me. Like, my husband still loves me. Like, there's so many people that love me. It's hard for me to like love myself and not be angry with myself. And I put this immense pressure on myself. And what I was also thinking about is how you're talking about the need to earn your worth or value, or like, working so hard to prove yourself. I mean, obviously I'm trying to be as mindful as I can be with my whole ballet journey and dance journey. And, I'm flat out told all the time, like, you haven't earned it and you're not worthy and all of these things. But I feel self-righteous in it because I'm just like, no, I know that I moved to New York so I could do this. I know that I work very hard in ways that you just don't see. And so that's fine. I'm not as insecure about that. I'm very aware that this is an insecurity I've dealt with because, like, for example, I've always had so many different odd jobs, and I've always hated the idea of like, oh, so what do you do? And it's always made me feel like, I how long do you have? Like, I don't know how to answer this. I can't be like, I'm a lawyer. There's just this whole thing that you need to unpackage of like, why didn't you finish school? Again, finishing things, why didn't you finish school? Why did this happen? Whatever. I always felt embarrassed and ashamed about that. And then finally, I got this job at an art restoration place. And on paper, it seemed great. It was the first time where when people asked me what I did, and I said, oh, I'm an art restorer, it made other people happy. And they were finally like, oh, tell me more about that. Finally giving that value, that validation of, okay, I'm worthy. I'm not a total fuck up, But I hated it. It was miserable. It was a completely abusive, toxic work environment, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. Like, it wasn't right. So it was just this first time of like how you were talking about, like you could work your whole life to prove yourself, and then I felt like I did it. Like I felt like I
Mm.
finally proved myself, and I'm like, I don't want this. This is, if this is what proving myself means, then I'm just going back to being a dog walker. I don't care. Like I was so much happier with that.
I think it's really interesting because you were just sort of talking about this whole idea of like finishing things and, like at LOL, another great example, like not finishing school or whatever. And it just in that moment dawned on me like, this is so interesting because actually a lot of the power of your story, a lot of the things you did right in your 20s was not finishing things. Like you didn't finish a school that would not have made you any closer to being a dancer. You like for ages you were trying to like see you through to the end, like being a fashion blogger and not allowing yourself to go into your dance. And like I think it's so interesting because actually like your yourself throughout your 20s was really literally looking in the world for that purpose and was picking things up, putting them down, and did eventually find it. So in many ways she really did everything right. And if she had been, more harsh and disciplined with her like finishing everything, you'd be a pastry chef now, or you'd be a pastry chef like fashion blogger or something. Like you wouldn't things would be very different. Like you and so there, you also have to have that compassion, I think, and realize like sometimes it's so easy to be like, I know everything now and I knew nothing then. But really like there's always been that through line and you have just been searching for it in quite an authentic way. And I also think probably fear has always been a huge part of it. And so if you want to maybe heal that, you have to, I think, like go of the fear a little bit. Like you don't want to take that girl's fear into this period of your life.
Holy shiza. Like when you just said that the power of my story is the fact that I haven't finished things, I feel like I don't even know how to explain how much that just changed my world. Like that was,
How many people are miserable and living miserable lives because they
yeah.
refuse to quit the wrong thing? They're like, oh, I have a
Yeah.
nice little job working as an art restorer. I'll just stay in this forever.
And it's so funny because someone commented on my video about like, why don't I finish things? And she was like, oh my gosh, yeah, like I have this whole table filled with projects. Like I started this sewing project and I started this project. And it's like when she said it, I was like, well, that sounds kind of fun. Like, I don't know, like
Mm.
you don't need to be hard on yourself. Like you're just trying things and you're just exploring. And I had so much compassion for her, but I couldn't have that compassion for myself. When it comes to me,
Mm.
I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, you're bad. You're a flake. What I've gleaned from this episode is
Mm.
that I need to get to a point where I'm not looking at my story and saying that it's wrong. This is my story. This
Mm.
is what happened. This is how it happened. And I actually, looking around, love my life. I love where I am. So why am I furious with myself for not being somewhere different? It's
Mm.
okay. And I actually think that the fact that I have even started late is what is resonating with so many people. And it's the thing that's even like finally working out for me to be able to grow this platform and finally share my journey and help people.
Yeah, no, I think this is so true. And I think it's also so important to remember that like what you've been doing since you were in your 20s is working for you. Like if you are
Yeah.
prouder of yourself now, if you think she is a better person or a person you're more proud of than you at 22 or something, you have to remember that like you at 22 created this person. And like
Yeah.
it's and also like we only live life by doing, but also I think what the Artist Way course is really teaching me is a big thing for me is always overthinking, am I going to be this kind of writer or this kind of writer? Should I make these kind of videos or these kind? And it's preventing me from making anything. And I
Yeah.
feel like that must have been a part of your kind of headspace all that time when you were in, pursuing dance and everything. And I think what's the thing I'm really learning and that's really liberating me in this moment is just realizing, like, actually having that table where you're like, here's a crochet project I started and here's my violin that I just decided to learn to play. Like, that messiness, that kind of chaotic, like, let's try a bit of this and try a bit of this. This is how we find the things that end up being, what we realize the medium we realize we're meant to work through, or the style that we end up having, or whatever. And we have, when you have like a lack mindset of time, it's like every moment I spend writing has to be, in the body of work that I'm going to make. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it always
Yeah.
has to be the product of when you've done the exploration, but really, like, the whole life has to be exploration. And that means the whole life has to be starting a bunch of projects and finishing like a third of them.
Yeah.
We're only going to know which third we're supposed to finish when we start. And it sounds like you've been doing a really good job of this thus far. So let's have a round of applause for early 20s Veronica. We love her, but also we're allowed to be
Oh,
angry at her. It's complicated. And we're allowed to feel whatever we feel.
no, I think I need to have like a makeup session with her and
Yes.
just like acknowledge, like, you know what she did and was doing was like brave in its own way, and there was nothing wrong with it, and she was doing the best that she could. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, thank you so
No
much for all of
problem.
your wisdom. Like, whoa, I'm a changed woman.
And like, maybe, like, because I think about this a lot as well with some of my own stuff, like maybe a
Yeah.
better way, instead of thinking, well, I'm different now because she was awful and I'm going to be different now and make my future self proud, maybe a different
Yeah.
way to think about it is to like have compassion for her fear and be like, and now because I love her, like, I get to heal her now. I get to bring her into this life. She gets to dance now. I'm going to, like, as the older Veronica, as the one who's healed more, I get to like give her that,
Yeah, that's so beautiful. What an emotional, oh, what an emotional episode. I feel like I can breathe again. Like, I
Oh,
don't know how to tell you how much you just like helped me. You're just so good. Oh my God.
this is it's always so fun, and I just love, like,
Yeah.
literally having these legitimate art therapy sessions with you.
I know, I know. Yeah, Ferg is the one who came up with that name, by the way, and that's really what it is. That is so what it is. It's art therapy. And everybody just let your art be your life, and it's okay to explore. Yeah.
And your life will hopefully be long.
Yes. Yeah, ideally long life.
So yeah, exactly. So we don't have to do it all today
Yeah.
either.
Okay, well, thank you for everything. Thank you for watching, especially if you've made it this far. And yeah, I'll see you next week for
See you
another
next
art
week.
therapy session.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Art Therapy. The course we are following is based on the book The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. If you would like to continue to follow us on this journey, you can find us every week for 12 weeks straight, alternating between Veronica's channel, Veronica Victoria, and my channel, The Prime of Life. You can also click here to gain access to the full playlists of episodes in order. Links to our channels, as well as our various other outlets, and to the Artist's Way book in both audio and PDF form, can be found in the description. Until next time, sending love.